If you crave hashtag crime stories, hashtag cold cases, and hashtag mysteries that refuse to die, this is your place. Subscribe and prepare yourself for the shadows. Daniel and Emma Russo left school during lunch break in 2004 and never returned. Their backpacks were left untouched, their car still parked outside, but the siblings had vanished into thin air. For 8 years, the town searched. Rumors grew, and the case turned into legend. Then, in 2012, a fire tore through an abandoned field near the school, burning weeds down to ash and exposing something beneath the soil that proved Daniel and Emma had never left at all. The fire started small, just a lick of flame in dry grass on the edge of town. Locals thought it would burn out quick, but wind caught it, carried it across the field that had been left to weeds for nearly a decade. By the time firefighters arrived, smoke was curling in black plumes, heat warping the air above the cracked dirt. That field had always been an eyesore. Overgrown, fenced halfway, used for nothing but dumping trash. Kids dared each other to cut across it after school, but most avoided it. Too quiet, too forgotten, as if the land itself didn't want company. When the blaze was finally under control, the field was stripped bare. Ash clung to twisted fence posts, charred bottles, and warped metal scraps. But in the middle of the soot, something glimmered pale beneath the scorched earth. At first, firefighters thought it was just debris, burned stone, maybe bone from an animal. But when investigators cleared away the ash, they froze. What the fire had exposed was no accident of nature. It was deliberate, buried shallow, hidden by weeds all these years. And when the medical examiner arrived, silence fell heavy over the blackened ground. The shapes were human. 2 of them. Within hours, the whispers spread across town. The Russo siblings, Daniel and Emma, who had vanished from school back in 2004. Could this be them? For 8 years, their disappearance had haunted the community. Search teams, posters, vigils. None had brought answers. The case had grown cold, their names reduced to rumors. Until the fire peeled back the land and revealed what everyone had feared. The siblings had never left. They had been here, hidden in plain sight, waiting for the flames to bring them back. Before they became names on missing posters, Daniel and Emma Russo were just ordinary kids. Ordinary, but with that sibling closeness that made them stand out. Daniel, 15, was lanky and restless. The kind of kid who drummed his fingers on desks, always itching for the next soccer match or bike ride. Teachers called him quick-witted, but unfocused. Friends called him fearless, sometimes reckless. He had a sharp grin, the kind that dared you to keep up. Emma, 13, was quieter, not shy, just observant. She noticed details others skipped over. The way chalk squeaked on the board, the exact shade of red on autumn leaves, the little sighs people gave when they thought no one was listening. She sketched in margins, filling notebooks with doodles and half-finished poems. Where Daniel was the storm, Emma was the stillness after. At school, they were inseparable. Lunch breaks always found them together. Daniel kicking a ball across the yard, Emma sitting nearby, sketchbook balanced on her knees. Teachers often joked, if you can't find one Russo, look for the other. Their parents, Marco and Elena, worked long hours but trusted the siblings to look out for each other. And they did. Daniel teased Emma endlessly, but heaven help anyone else who tried. Emma rolled her eyes at his antics, but she was the first to patch him up when he came home with scrapes. That bond, the simple, ordinary bond of 2 siblings navigating their teenage years, was what made their disappearance so gutting. Families can fracture. Friends can drift. But Daniel and Emma were a pair, always together, which made it all the more haunting that they vanished together too. March 12, 2004, was supposed to be just another school day. The weather was clear, the kind that hinted at spring. Daniel had his soccer ball tucked under one arm when he walked into the courtyard that morning, already talking about practice. Emma trailed behind, sketchbook in hand, earbuds tucked under her hoodie. Teachers remembered nothing unusual. Daniel was caught whispering jokes in history class. Emma turned in a half-finished poem for English. At lunch, they sat together as always, Daniel trading snacks, Emma shading the outline of a tree in her notebook. It was after lunch that the timeline fractured. A friend recalled seeing them leave the building, backpacks slung over their shoulders, heading toward the side gate. They said they'd be back before the next bell, but they never returned. By dismissal, their backpacks were still in their lockers. The soccer ball Daniel had been bouncing was found leaning against a bench, as if he'd set it down absent-mindedly. Emma's sketchbook was open on a table in the library, a half-drawn outline left behind. Some students swore they saw the siblings near the edge of the school field, walking side by side. Others insisted they saw them heading toward the main road. But no one could agree on the exact moment they disappeared. When the last bus pulled away that afternoon, teachers realized something was wrong. Daniel and Emma's carpool driver waited, scanning the empty curb. The Russo siblings had simply not come back. The school called their parents by early evening. Marco and Elena arrived in a panic, expecting to find their kids waiting somewhere. But they weren't. The ordinary school day had ended with an absence so sharp it sliced into the community. Daniel and Emma had walked out of the school gates together, and from that moment, they were gone. When Marco and Elena Russo pulled up to the school that evening, they expected to see Daniel and Emma waiting near the curb, maybe laughing with friends. Instead, the courtyard was empty, the gates locked, and only the janitor lingered near the steps. The first phone calls were frantic. Marco dialed classmates, coaches, even neighbors. "Have you seen them? Did they go home with you?" Each answer came back the same. No. Elena checked the house, thinking maybe the kids had walked home on their own, but the living room was still, their beds untouched, their dinner plates stacked neatly in the cupboard. By 9 p.m., the panic spilled into the police station. Officers took down the details. 2 minors, siblings, last seen at school grounds around midday. The usual questions followed. Were they unhappy? Did they fight with anyone? Any chance they ran away? Marco's voice cracked as he snapped. "They're kids! They wouldn't just leave." That night, search parties formed. Flashlights bobbed through the schoolyard, beams slicing across empty fields and playground equipment. Teachers joined in, some muttering nervously. They couldn't have gone far. Others, under their breath, whispered darker possibilities. The school lockers were opened. Daniel still held his books, crammed with messy notes. Emma's contained neatly stacked binders, her pencil case zipped tight. Nothing missing, nothing to suggest they planned to leave. By dawn, the town knew. Flyers with Daniel and Emma's faces were printed in black and white, taped to telephone poles, pinned to store windows. On each, missing. Last seen at school. Please help. Rumors moved faster than the paper could be posted. Some neighbors shook their heads and said, "Kids run away more often than you think." Others whispered, "Not both, not like this." The Russo household became a revolving door of officers, reporters, and neighbors bearing casseroles and sympathy that tasted like pity. For Marco and Elena, the house felt hollow. Daniel's soccer shoes by the door, Emma's sketches scattered on her desk, all untouched. What began as a late pickup had become a nightmare. 2 children had walked out of school, broad daylight, with hundreds of eyes around, and still, they had disappeared without a trace. The search for Daniel and Emma Russo quickly grew into one of the largest the county had seen in years. Police, rangers, and volunteers formed long lines across the school grounds, combing every inch of grass and dirt. The soccer field was dragged with rakes, ditches scoured, dumpsters overturned. Nothing. Canine units were brought in. The dogs picked up a faint trail near the side gate, leading toward the wooded edge of the school property. But just a few yards into the trees, the scent evaporated as if the siblings had stepped off the earth. Handlers muttered uneasily, tugging at the leashes. Helicopters hovered low, their spotlights scanning rooftops and fields. Officers checked drainage tunnels, creeks, and abandoned sheds. Teachers walked the halls over and over, opening closets, calling names into empty classrooms. But as hours turned into days, contradictions piled up. One student insisted she'd seen Daniel and Emma heading toward the main road after lunch. Another swore they'd been on the field together at the same time. A janitor thought he saw Daniel's red jacket in the library that afternoon, but couldn't be sure. The timeline fractured. By the 3rd day, frustration simmered. Volunteers whispered among themselves. 2 kids don't just vanish. Someone saw something. A group of mothers at the school fence traded theories in low voices. Maybe they were lured. Maybe someone's covering for them. The Russo family clung to hope, but the silence grew heavier. Flyers with their children's faces now fluttered in the wind, rain curling the edges. Each day without answers felt like another nail, sealing the mystery shut. The search had found no backpacks, no clothing, no trail, just the eerie certainty that Daniel and Emma had left the school grounds, and then the world had swallowed them. When a search turns cold, facts stop leading the way. Rumors take over. By the 2nd week of silence, gossip about Daniel and Emma spread faster than the flyers stapled to telephone poles. At the corner cafe, 2 men leaned close over their espressos. "Kids run off all the time," one muttered. "Bet they planned it." His friend frowned. Planned it how? They left everything behind. Money, books, even shoes. That's not running away. At the grocery store, a cashier whispered that maybe Emma had a secret boyfriend. Someone else suggested Daniel had gotten into trouble with older kids, dragging his sister into it. By the time the story reached the barbershop, people were claiming the siblings had been seen in another town. No proof, just talk. Some theories turned cruel. Neighbors pointed fingers at the parents. Maybe home wasn't as happy as it looked, one woman said in hushed tones. Another snapped back. Don't you dare. Those parents love their kids. Others leaned into the eerie. An elderly man on the edge of town swore the wooded field by the school had a history, muttering about strange sounds at night and lights that weren't from cars. His words drew nervous laughter, but no one completely dismissed them. Meanwhile, Marco and Elena endured it all in silence. At church, they overheard whispers in the pews. Outside their own home, they caught neighbors exchanging glances. Each rumor felt like a fresh wound. The community hadn't just lost 2 children, it had fractured, choosing sides between sympathy, suspicion, and fear. And still, the truth remained buried. For Marco and Elena Russo, life split in 2, the world before March 12th and the one after. Their home, once noisy with Daniel's thudding soccer ball and Emma's pencil scratching across paper, became hollow. Plates sat untouched at dinner. Bedrooms were left exactly as they'd been that morning. Clothes piled on chairs. Emma's sketches taped unevenly on the wall. Daniel's muddy cleats by the door. The media camped outside within days. Reporters knocked on the door, asking for statements, cameras flashing as Elena wept silently on the porch. Marco grew defensive, pacing, snapping at anyone who implied his children might have run away. They were taken, he repeated, voice cracking. Somebody took them. Family members tried to help, but grief made the walls thin. Elena's sister stayed for a week, cooking meals no one touched. Marco's brother organized vigils, candles lined along the school fence, dozens of people holding signs with Daniel and Emma's faces. The gesture was moving, but it didn't bring answers. Behind closed doors, tension festered. Marco buried himself in the search, chasing every rumor, knocking on doors at midnight, demanding answers from anyone who claimed to have seen the children. Elena sank into silence, clutching Emma's sketchbook at night as if her daughter might return for it. Whispers in town sometimes pointed back at them. Parents always fall under suspicion when answers don't come quickly. Marco heard the gossip and bristled, shouting at a shopkeeper once when he caught him muttering. Neighbors grew awkward, their sympathy brittle. The Russos weren't just grieving. They were fighting the crushing weight of suspicion, silence, and time. And each day, the absence of Daniel and Emma carved deeper into their lives. In the first months after Daniel and Emma vanished, tips poured in. So many that investigators set up a separate hotline just to handle them. Every ring of the phone sent Marco and Elena into a storm of hope and dread. One caller swore they saw 2 kids matching the Russos' description hitchhiking near the highway. Police rushed there, nothing. Another insisted they'd been spotted in a mall 2 towns over, holding hands, looking lost. Security cameras showed no trace. Then came the letters. Anonymous notes slid under the Russo family's door claiming knowledge of what happened. Some demanded money. Others simply wrote, "They are gone. Stop searching." Police traced them, each one a cruel hoax. By the 6-month mark, contradictions piled higher than evidence. A janitor remembered seeing Daniel's red jacket near the gym that afternoon, but couldn't pin the time. A classmate said Emma had been upset that morning, though no teacher confirmed it. And yet, there were eerie details that stuck. A groundskeeper swore he found 2 sets of footprints near the far edge of the school field, small, side by side. But before they could be studied, rain washed them away. Another officer mentioned a patch of disturbed soil behind the fence near the overgrown field, but by the time investigators returned, the ground looked ordinary again. The town, once buzzing with urgency, began to sag under the weight of disappointment. Posters curled on poles, the ink fading. Vigils drew fewer people each time. Neighbors, once eager to help, stopped meeting Marco's eyes at the store. And still, Marco and Elena refused to give up. Marco drove the back roads at night, headlights sweeping empty fields. Elena sat awake, listening for the sound of the front door creaking open. But the silence never broke. Every lead collapsed. Every tip turned to dust. And as the years stretched forward, hope began to feel like another cruel rumor. By the end of the first year, investigators began shifting their language. What started as an active search quietly became an open case. In press conferences, officials repeated phrases like, quote, no signs of abduction, and, quote, possibility of voluntary disappearance. To Marco and Elena, those words felt like betrayal. How could anyone believe their children had chosen to vanish, leaving their school bags, shoes, and every belonging behind? Marco slammed his fist on the table during one meeting, his voice shaking. You don't just walk away from your life at 15 and 13. Stop calling it voluntary. Someone did this to them. But the official reports hardened. Detectives pointed to the lack of evidence. No forced entry at school. No blood. No belongings scattered. They suggested Daniel and Emma may have wandered off and succumbed to exposure, or slipped into trouble no one had seen. The community watched the divide widen. Some sided with the police, muttering at cafes. The parents can't accept it. Maybe the kids ran off. Others leaned closer, lowering their voices. No bodies. No proof. Feels like someone's covering something. Elena tried speaking to reporters, her voice fragile but steady, repeating the same plea. Please, don't let them be forgotten. They were taken. Somebody knows. Marco grew more volatile, lashing out at neighbors when he caught them whispering. He even followed a lead himself, digging through an abandoned shed on the edge of town, only to find rusted tools and silence. The tension between family and authorities became its own story. Headlines painted the Russos as desperate, unwilling to face facts. But for Marco and Elena, there was only one fact. Their children had disappeared in broad daylight, and no report could explain it away. The case might have been fading from official records, but for the Russos, it was still alive, burning, festering, demanding answers. By 2007, 3 years after Daniel and Emma disappeared, the posters had begun to fade into the background. The edges curled on telephone poles, sun bleaching their faces until they were ghost-like outlines. People still recognized the names, but the urgency had drained away. The Russo house stood frozen in time. Emma's sketches still covered her bedroom wall, pencil strokes untouched. Daniel's soccer ball sat deflated in the corner of the yard, weeds pushing through the grass around it. Marco refused to change anything, every detail left in place, as if his children might walk through the door at any moment. Every March, the family held vigils outside the school gates. Dozens came the first year, candles lighting the fence, soft prayers carrying into the night. By the 5th anniversary, only a handful gathered, mostly relatives and a few loyal neighbors. The crowd had shrunk, but the pain had not. Whispers never really stopped. At the bakery, an old man said, "Maybe the siblings were taken far away." Trafficked. Another dismissed him. If that were true, someone would have seen something. Younger kids, who'd been only toddlers in 2004, grew up with the story as a kind of warning. Parents told them, "Don't stray after school. Remember what happened to the Russos." The siblings became less like real children and more like folklore. The town carried their absence like a scar, visible, but never spoken about directly. For Marco and Elena, silence was its own torment. Police stopped calling with updates. Journalists moved on. Neighbors avoided eye contact, their pity wearing thin. And yet, inside the house, the clock seemed to have stopped on that March afternoon in 2004. The world had moved forward. But for the Russos, time had collapsed into a single, unending moment. The day Daniel and Emma walked out of school and never came home. It was August of 2012, a summer hotter than most. The fields around town were brittle. The grass yellowed to straw. Kids still cut across the school's back fence on dares, but even they avoided the wide, overgrown field just beyond it. The weeds there grew chest-high, the soil cracked and gray, rusting cans and old furniture half buried in the brush. For years the land had sat abandoned, too wild for play, too forgotten for care. One evening a fire broke out. No one knew the exact cause. Maybe a tossed cigarette? Maybe the heat itself. Flames licked the dry weeds and spread quick, racing across the field with a hiss that turned into a roar. By the time firefighters arrived, orange light had swallowed the sky. The old fence posts popped and cracked. Ash whirled into the air like black snow. Neighbors gathered on the sidewalks, shielding their faces from the heat. Children clung to their parents' legs, wide-eyed as smoke rolled heavy and low. Field hadn't burned in decades, one man muttered, shaking his head. Maybe it needed to. By dawn, the fire was contained. All that remained was a scar. Blackened earth stretching wide, weeds reduced to ash, debris melted into twisted shapes. The field that had hidden itself for nearly a decade now lay bare. As crews raked through smoldering patches, clearing hot spots, one firefighter paused. Beneath the soot, something pale gleamed, a shape that didn't belong to stone or scrap. He called another over, both crouching low, brushing away charred soil with their gloves. What surfaced stopped them cold. Bone, not animal, but human. And not one, but two, side by side. The discovery spread before officials could contain it. Investigators swarmed the burned field within hours. Yellow tape fluttered in the smoky breeze, cordoning off the site as crews in masks and gloves sifted carefully through the scorched earth. The crowd pressed against the tape, whispering, stretching for glimpses of what the fire had exposed. The bones were unmistakably human, two sets, small and side by side. Forensic teams brushed away layers of ash, revealing fragments of fabric clinging stubbornly to the soil. A faded red scrap melted into the ground, eerily close to the color of the jacket Daniel had been wearing the day he vanished. A few feet away, investigators uncovered metal zippers fused by heat, a pair of shoelace eyelets warped but intact. Then came the item that froze the onlookers, an outline of a backpack, scorched but still recognizable, straps clinging to charred earth. One officer, his voice low but heavy, said, "This didn't just happen. Someone put them here." As word spread, the gossip that had simmered for years reignited. Some muttered that the police had never searched the field properly, that the children had been there all along. Others leaned toward darker explanations. They weren't just buried, they were hidden. Somebody meant for them not to be found. When the coroner's team lifted the remains onto stretchers, silence fell over the crowd. Neighbors who had whispered theories for years now stared at the burned field, realizing the children they'd spoken of so casually had been lying beneath it. For Marco and Elena, the phone call came before the press release. 8 years of waiting ended not with reunion, but with confirmation. Their children hadn't run away. They hadn't vanished into thin air. They'd been buried in plain sight, just beyond the schoolyard fence. The fire had spoken, and what it revealed was worse than silence. Within weeks, forensic analysis confirmed what the town already feared. The remains from the burned field belonged to Daniel and Emma Russo. Dental records matched without question, the final blow to years of denial and faint hope. But the details released were far more disturbing than anyone had braced for. The siblings hadn't simply been buried. They'd been placed deliberately, side by side, as though someone had taken care in arranging them. Soil samples showed they'd been there since the time of their disappearance in 2004, hidden beneath weeds and trash that had covered the ground for years. Fragments of clothing clung to their bones. Emma's pale sneakers, Daniel's red jacket, both scorched but unmistakable. Even more haunting, Emma's sketchbook was recovered near her remains. The pages were mostly destroyed, but one fragment survived, a faint pencil outline of a tree. Investigators couldn't say if she'd drawn it that final day, but the detail sent chills through anyone who heard it. The medical examiner reported no clear cause of death, citing deterioration and fire damage. But traces on the bones suggested blunt trauma, enough to raise suspicions of violence. Police stopped short of calling it homicide, but their silence spoke louder than words. When the news broke, the town reeled. For years, theories had spun wild, but the reality was simpler and crueler. Daniel and Emma had never left. They'd been just 2 miles from their school, in a field children walked past daily. Parents muttered angrily at cafes. How was that field never searched properly? Others shook their heads, whispering, "It was too deliberate. Someone made sure they stayed hidden." The Russo family finally had answers. But answers came with no justice, and no peace. The discovery should have brought closure, but instead it cracked open a new wound. The community's grief quickly turned to anger. Parents crowded town halls, demanding to know why the field hadn't been searched back in 2004. "It was right there," one father shouted. "How do you miss a field 2 blocks from the school?" Suspicion bled into every conversation. At the bakery, 2 women whispered as they bagged bread. "They didn't search properly. Maybe they didn't want to." Another leaned closer. Or maybe someone higher up told them not to look. Theories grew darker. Some muttered about cover-ups, that the police had known more all along, that the field had been deliberately ignored to protect someone. An older man at the cafe stirred his coffee slowly, saying, "You don't bury kids like that unless you expect no one to look." Somebody counted on it. Others took the eerie route, whispering about the field itself, calling it cursed, a place locals had always avoided. Children who once dared each other to cut across it now crossed themselves when passing by. Marco and Elena watched it all unfold from the sidelines, hollow-eyed. They no longer cared for theories. They wanted accountability. They wanted to know who had placed their children in that shallow grave and why. But officials gave little. The press releases were stiff. Investigation ongoing. No further comment. The town didn't buy it. What had once been whispers had become a roar. Suspicions, fear, and mistrust, echoing louder than the fire trucks that had uncovered the truth. The burned field was fenced off within weeks, a scar of black earth slowly sprouting weeds again. But no fence could contain the questions it left behind. Daniel and Emma Russo's remains were laid to rest beside each other, the way they had been found. At their funeral, silence hung heavier than hymns. Neighbors wept, some out of grief, others out of guilt, because for 8 years the siblings had been lying just beyond the schoolyard, unseen. The case was officially ruled unresolved. No suspect, no motive, no justice, just the eerie fact that 2 children vanished in daylight and ended up buried in a place everyone overlooked. To this day, locals speak of the Russo siblings in hushed tones. Some say the fire that revealed them wasn't chance. It was the land itself refusing to keep the secret any longer. Others insist the real secret still lives in town, hidden behind familiar faces. What's certain is this: the flames cleared the field, but they didn't clear the mystery. And Daniel and Emma's story lingers as a reminder that silence doesn't mean peace. It only means the truth is still waiting to be unearthed. And that's the chilling case of Daniel and Emma Russo, 2 siblings who vanished from school in broad daylight, only to be uncovered years later in a field everyone overlooked. But the real question remains: who put them there, and how did they stay hidden for so long? Share your theories in the comments below. If this story gripped you, don't forget to like the video, subscribe, and hit the bell so you never miss the next mystery. And send this to someone who follows true crime, because the more these stories are told, the harder they are to bury.